It is finally here. Wait, that sounded familiar. No, I am not talking about the A7R5. We already talked about that in the past video. But what I'm saying is that raw support for the raw files of the Sony A7R5 are finally out. Which means that we can finally take a peek at the photos that we have taken, I have taken, and if you already have your A7R5, then you can already access those files. And that also means that in this video, we'll talk about the image quality that we get from the Sony A7R5, specifically for me as a landscape photographer, but you know what? We're gonna throw in some sample raw files of both landscapes and portraits. Now, it's totally up to you how you use your photos and how you maximize your camera. But for me as a landscape and architectural photographer and how I use my photos, I make it a point to truly test out what the raw file can do before I actually form an opinion about a particular camera. This is because I actually do believe that I max out the capabilities of the cameras that I use, specifically on image quality, resolution, and dynamic range. Which means that for me to form any informed opinion about a particular camera and its capabilities, I have to really use it the way I use my cameras and use the raw files the way I use my own raw files. So what we're gonna do in this video is basically explore what the raw files can do depending on my own personal workflow, and for you to be able to try the raw files yourself if you're on the fence about getting an A7R5, then I will put down below in the description a Google Drive link where you can download these raw files so you can try them for yourself. In addition, I asked my good friend Jiggy Alejandrino, a portrait and wedding photographer and a fellow Sony Philippines brand ambassador, to also chip in on a few raw files for portrait photography so you can try it as well. The link will be in the description of this video, so feel free to download them and edit them as you like. And if you're gonna post them, then feel free to tag us so we can see what you actually did. So for this review, we're gonna check out these 5 raw files, raw photos that I took with the A7R5 in the past 2 weeks that I've already had it. And of course, I have already worked on these photos and tried to edit them myself. But basically, I want to show you the before and afters. The point is that we're gonna take a look at what I get straight out of the camera and show you the extent of how far we can push that file in terms of post-processing the image. Now, as I said, this will be based off of my own personal workflow. Now, the first time I actually tried the A7R5, I went to Masungi Geo Reserve. If you're not familiar, Masungi Geo Reserve is a protected forest land near my home city of Quezon City. This is in Baras, Rizal. And I go to Masungi quite often to do photo tours where I bring other photographers to shoot within Masungi. And basically, whatever they pay to get there and shoot there is contributed to the fund that helps the foundation support, conserve, and reforest Masungi Geo Reserve. If you're interested in that, and of course if you're going to be in the Philippines or you are in the Philippines, then feel free to send me an email or through my Instagram. Okay, so this was actually day 1 of my A7R5 and one of the first few images that I took. Now, I initially shot this with bracketed exposures, but for the sake of just trying to see what the raw file can do, we are gonna process just a single exposure. Now, very easily, I can show you my before and after so you can see where the image started and basically where it went. Now, what we're gonna do is reset that and start from scratch to show you basically what I did to achieve that. However, it will be hard to perfectly replicate, so let's see what we're gonna have here. So here, let's start with the profile. Usually I start with Adobe Landscape. However, I do believe I used something else to be able to get this, and I wanted to try the vivid profile within the Sony camera. Now, next what I adjusted is the white balance to give it a warmer tone. And the bulk of the difference in what you saw in the previous photo actually came from local editing, which means that here I actually very conveniently selected the sky mask to be able to manipulate the sky selectively. Of course, what I'm going to do is decrease the exposure of the sky for just a bit, maybe add a bit of dehaze, and also change the temperature for quite a bit. You can see that even if we started with basically a dead gray or actually overexposed sky, we were able to bring out some detail in the sky right there. Now the next thing I do is another selective edit using a radial gradient because I kind of want to enhance the luminosity of this patch in the center by very subtly increasing the exposure. And next, another radial gradient simply to reshape the light. You'll see that this will actually go kind of hand in hand with the tangential lighting that we have already in the scene. What this is gonna do is basically to emphasize that. So I'm gonna invert the mask and kind of create a crooked vignette. Now I'm gonna go back to the old mask because I actually want that to be somewhat warmer. And there we go. Now one thing that we have to work with is to backtrack on the exposure because it actually got a bit dark. And the last part that I want to do is to actually enhance the color harmony in this shot. As you can see, there is a blend of darker green and somewhat some yellower green or warmer green. So I kind of want to somehow separate those two tones to be able to come up with something a bit more pleasing to the eyes. This means that I'm gonna take the green hue and push it a bit to the right, but also backtracking on the saturation because that's gonna go a bit too far. Then I'm gonna take the yellow hue and make it a bit more orange. So you can see that there's somewhat separation between the greener leaves and those that are a bit more yellow. The last thing I will do is just simply to improve the isolation that we have here, the emphasis that we have here, by adding a subtle gradient to the bottom and also reducing the saturation to give it somewhat of a natural bleed out. And as you can see, this is all just one raw file, not really manipulation, but just really maximizing what you can do with the raw file that you have. And again, for your reference, this is where we started from. Now let's go to this photo. This photo is of one of the rangers of Masumi Reserve, the great people who protect the forest and help conserve Masumi. His name is Kuya Jun, and he basically gave us a tour and helped us find the best vantage points to shoot in Masumi, and he gladly posed for this photo inside the cave within the forest. Now, as you can see, I already reset this to show you how the raw file basically started. And I was first peeping into this raw file. This is basically where my opinion was formed. At first, I thought that the A7R5 would have a similar image output than the A7R4, which I've been using for quite a while. I've actually also shot this place with that camera with the same lens. However, I was quite surprised when I zoomed in and I saw so much more detail than what I was used to. You can see that the texture of the entire cave was just very well resolved in this image. And of course, what I did here is turn it into black and white to come up with something that even emphasizes the textures more. And if we go back to the first image, I also want to show you basically how the A7R5 treated the foliage. So you can see the details of the trees. This was shot at ISO 200, so barely any noise. 1/200 at f8. at 83 millimeters. And mind you, I shot this with the 70 to 200 f4, not the G Master version. But you can see that I don't think there's anything more I want to see because everything is just sharp and crisp. Now on another night, I was able to witness the full moon rise, and I basically watched it from the comfort of my balcony because I was sick. And basically what I did was I was quite fascinated with how the moon looked being surrounded by thin clouds, so much so that the clouds were actually decreasing the luminosity of the moon and somehow making it fit better within the dynamic range of the camera. Which means that this, again, this raw file is a single exposure, and I did shoot this for HDR, and I found that I can actually just use this single raw image to bring out the output that I wanted. Now basically all I wanted was to have a bit more detail in the moon and also give a bit more texture to the clouds, and that's basically it. I did use a profile from Adobe instead of the one that I have on my camera simply because I wanted a matte texture on this one and just a bit of vibrance on the sky. Now, I'm trying to avoid making this video too long because really, if you want to see how I edit my cityscapes, then I'm pretty sure you already saw that in my channel in a multitude of videos that I've done showing how I edit my cityscapes. But basically, this shot was taken around sunset, just a bit after sunset. I shot this at ISO 140 millimeters with the 24 to 70 f2.8 G Master version 1 at f11 for just 10 seconds. The only filter that I used here was a reverse graduated neutral density filter so that I could darken the sky a bit and make it blend better with the cityscape. So as you can see, I used the profile of camera vivid and barely any adjustments, just a bit of clarity to really emphasize more the structures of the city. Now this last raw file, I did not use a graduated neutral density filter here, so you can actually see better what you can do with the bare sky. If we reset that, you can see that it is much brighter, but basically following what I did on the first image, you can do the same by selecting a mask for the sky and achieve better balance with your own edits. Now as I said, the difference in the quality of the raw files of the A7R5 did surprise me a bit. It was definitely way better than I expected, and I was really expecting it to be similar to the A7R4. Then I kind of had to dig deep a little into the specifications just to try and see what made the difference. This has a 61 megapixel sensor, same as the A7R4, but what actually made the difference between this and the older camera is the new processor. The A7R4 has a Bionic X processor, while the A7R5 actually has the new Bionic XR. And you can basically think of this as having a whole new computer in your camera that helps you resolve the images better. And that's where I think the difference in the image quality came from. And definitely I am happy that it's there. And there we go. This camera definitely exceeded what I expected out of it when it comes to image quality. I expected it to be pretty similar to the A7R4. However, I was surprised by the enhancements that I saw. And of course, everything else about this camera I've talked about in my previous video that talks about the screen, the autofocus, and everything else. So if you haven't seen that, do check it out. Perhaps in addition to everything I've said about this camera in terms of using it, what I do want to see is a change in how we use the touch shutter. Of course, this camera also has touch shutter, which is a feature that first came out with the A7 IV. Now with the touch shutter, of course, all you need to do is tap on the touch screen where you want the camera to focus and it will start the exposure. That's perfect. However, what I do want to see is for that to be functional also in bulb mode. That means that if I press on the screen, it's gonna start the exposure, and it's gonna wait until I press the screen again for it to stop the exposure. That means that I'm gonna be able to do longer exposures than the usual 30 seconds. That's a feature I've been wanting to see in Sony cameras in the past, so I do hope that that is something that Sony will come up with in the near future, perhaps with a software update. On top of that, I'm really impressed with the Sony A7R5. No regrets in getting this, and I am definitely excited to take this out more in the field. Now, if you have any questions, you know the drill, leave them down below in the comment section. And if you are new to the channel, my name is Nicco Valenzuela, a landscape and architectural photographer. This channel talks about that and a whole lot more. So if you haven't, press that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so I will see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.